When my son passed away, my daughter-in-law said, "Don't be dramatic. Pack your bags and learn to survive." I wiped my tears and lived in my car for 2 weeks. That's when my son's lawyer called with some good news. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." I never imagined that losing Michael would be the second worst thing to happen to me that week. My son had been gone for exactly 7 days when Victoria walked into the living room where I sat organizing teaching materials from his childhood, tears falling silently onto the faded worksheets I'd saved from when he was 7 years old. The funeral flowers were still fresh in their vases, their heavy sweetness mixing with the scent of his cologne that still clung to his favorite sweater. "Beverly, we need to talk," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Not the composed, sympathetic tone she'd used at the funeral when the school board members were watching. I looked up from the pile of his elementary school art projects, expecting maybe a conversation about Sophie and Lucas, or perhaps arrangements for Michael's belongings. My daughter-in-law stood in the doorway wearing a designer blazer and tailored pants that probably cost more than my monthly teacher's pension. Her perfectly manicured fingers tapped against the doorframe with calculated impatience. "Of course, dear, what is it?" Victoria stepped into the room but remained standing, her presence commanding the space as I sat curled in Michael's favourite reading chair, the one he'd brought from his apartment when he moved back to town to start his tech company. "I've been thinking about the living situation," she began, and my stomach dropped like a stone. "With Michael gone, things need to change dramatically. The children and I need space to process this properly. And frankly, having you here is counterproductive right now." I blinked hard, trying to understand her meaning. "Counterproductive. You're constantly dwelling on the past, always handling his things, always bringing up memories like he's going to walk through that door. It's psychologically unhealthy for Sophie and Lucas to see their grandmother stuck in this cycle." Her voice was steady, clinical, like she was delivering a performance review. "They need forward momentum, not constant reminders of trauma." My hands trembled on the worksheet I'd been holding. Michael's handwriting from 3rd grade, where he'd written "My mum is the best teacher in the world" in careful pencil strokes. He'd given it to me just 3 weeks ago when he'd cleaned out his old room, saying he wanted me to remember how proud he'd always been of me. "Victoria, this is my home too." Michael and I discussed this extensively before he got sick. He wanted me here to help with the children's education, to provide stability during their grief. She let out a sharp laugh that held no warmth whatsoever. "Michael said many things when he was on medication and not thinking rationally. The reality is that this house belongs to me now, and I need you to make other arrangements." The words hit me like a physical assault. I felt the breath leave my body, and for a moment the room seemed to spin. "Make other arrangements? Don't be dramatic, Beverly. You're an educated woman with a pension. Figure out your next steps and learn to be independent. Michael always said you were more resourceful than you gave yourself credit for." She paused to check her reflection in the hallway mirror, smoothing her perfectly styled hair. "Besides, you'll adapt. You always do." I thought about my teacher's pension, modest but steady. Certainly not enough for a security deposit and first month's rent in this expensive residential neighborhood where my grandchildren lived, where Michael was buried, where I'd built my entire post-retirement life. What about Sophie and Lucas? I help them with homework every afternoon. I support their emotional needs. I cook meals that actually nourish them. My voice grew smaller as I saw her expression harden. "I'll manage that myself." Maybe it's time they developed more self-reliance anyway. Michael coddled them excessively, and honestly, so do you. The casual cruelty in her tone made my chest ache with recognition. These were her own children she was dismissing. The same children who sought me out when they had nightmares, who begged me to help them with math problems, who called me their favorite grandma because I was their only grandma. Victoria's parents had never expressed interest in being involved grandparents. "How much time do I have?" I managed to whisper. "I'd prefer you gone by tomorrow evening. I have interior designers coming to assess Michael's office space, and I don't want any emotional complications. Tomorrow evening, 24 hours to dismantle the life I'd carefully built here over the past 5 years. Ever since Michael had convinced me to sell my cozy retirement condo and move in to help with childcare when Victoria's consulting business demanded more travel. Where am I supposed to go, Victoria? I don't have anything arranged. Could I have a week? Perhaps 2, just to secure proper housing?" Her expression remained unmoved. If anything, it grew more impatient. "Beverly, I really need you to stop making this more difficult than necessary. Michael's gone. Circumstances have changed. You're not my obligation. Not her obligation. After 5 years of preparing nutritious meals, she was too busy to cook, of staying awake with sick children while she attended networking events, of maintaining this household's educational standards while she built her personal brand. After 5 years of being the grandmother who never missed a school performance or science fair, who remembered every learning milestone and developmental need, I nodded slowly, not trusting my voice to remain composed. I'll pack tonight. As I started to rise from the chair, Victoria's voice stopped me cold. Oh, and Beverly, I'd appreciate it if you didn't create unnecessary drama with Sophie and Lucas. They're already processing significant trauma. The last thing they need is to witness you having some kind of emotional breakdown. That night, I packed my belongings in the same luggage I'd brought when I moved in 5 years ago. It was startling how few possessions I actually owned. Most of the furniture in my room had come with the house, and I'd gradually donated most of my teaching materials and personal items over the years, keeping only essentials and precious mementos. I carefully tucked Michael's childhood worksheet into my suitcase, along with a framed photo of him holding Sophie and Lucas on their last Christmas morning together. I left behind the small television he'd installed in my room, the comfortable reading chair that had been his housewarming gift to me, the bookshelf filled with educational resources we'd discussed over Sunday morning coffee. The most painful part was composing the note for Sophie and Lucas. How do you explain to a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old that their grandmother is leaving without making their mother appear heartless? How do you say goodbye without promising to see them soon when you have no idea where you'll be living, or how you'll manage it? In the end, I kept it simple. Grandma Beverly had to move to a new home, but I love you both so very much. Be good students for Mommy. Love and hugs always. I left the note on their bathroom mirror where they'd discover it in the morning after I was already gone. I couldn't bear to face their confused questions or witness their tears. Victoria was right about one thing. They'd already lost their father. They didn't need to watch their grandmother fall apart as well. As dawn broke over the residential street where Michael had been so proud to establish his family's dream home, I loaded my car with everything I had left in the world. The trunk barely closed over my belongings, and the back seat held the few groceries I'd managed to gather from the kitchen. Crackers, peanut butter, bottled water, things that wouldn't spoil quickly. I sat in the driveway for a long moment, staring up at the house where my son had lived his final years, where my grandchildren were probably still sleeping peacefully in their beds, unaware that their daily anchor had just vanished from their lives. Victoria appeared at the front window, coffee mug in hand, observing me with the same detached expression she might wear while watching a neighborhood garage sale. Making sure I actually left, I realized. Making sure I didn't change my mind and return to complicate her fresh start. I shifted the car into reverse and drove away from the only family I had left, with nowhere to go and no clear idea how I was going to survive what came next. Now, I'm curious about you who are listening to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever experienced something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm sharing on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here. 2 weeks. That's how long a person can live in their car before the shame becomes almost overwhelming. I'd parked behind a 24-hour supermarket on the outskirts of town, far enough from Michael's neighborhood that I wouldn't risk encountering anyone I knew, but close enough that I could still drive by the children's school sometimes and catch a glimpse of them during recess. Pathetic, perhaps, but those moments were the only brightness in my increasingly dark days. The first few nights I'd convinced myself this was temporary. I'd find a solution. Maybe a room to rent or a small apartment within my budget. I'd applied to 3 different senior living communities, but the waiting lists stretched for months, and the deposits were far beyond my reach. The few affordable apartments I'd investigated were in neighborhoods where I was afraid to walk to my car during daylight hours, let alone live alone at night. My daily routine had become a careful choreography of survival and dignity. Every morning at 6:00 a.m. when the supermarket opened, I'd go inside and use their restroom to wash my face and brush my teeth. I'd buy a cup of coffee and a muffin from their deli, the cheapest breakfast I could find, and sit in their small food court for as long as I could make them last. Sometimes stretching one coffee for 3 hours while I read yesterday's newspaper someone had left behind. The worst part wasn't the physical discomfort. Though sleeping curled up in the driver's seat had left my entire body aching with constant pain. It wasn't even the fear, though every night brought new terrors. Strange noises, flashlights from security guards making their rounds. The constant worry that someone would realize I was living in my car and contact the authorities. The worst part was the invisibility. I'd become a ghost of my former life. Yesterday, I'd seen my former colleague Margaret at the grocery store where I was buying another loaf of bread and jar of peanut butter, my diet for the past week. She'd looked right through me as if I wasn't standing 3 feet away. We'd had coffee together dozens of times during our teaching careers, had exchanged holiday gifts for 5 years, and now I was invisible to her. I understood why. I looked homeless because I was homeless. My clothes, even though I tried to keep them clean in the supermarket's restroom sink, were wrinkled from sleeping in them. My hair, usually neat and professionally styled, hung limp around my face. I'd lost weight I couldn't afford to lose, and there were dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. But it was more than my appearance. It was like I'd crossed some invisible boundary that separated the housed from the unhoused. And once you crossed it, people couldn't see you anymore. You became part of the landscape they drove past, a problem they didn't want to acknowledge. The hardest moment came when I decided to drive by Michael's house, my former home, to see if I could catch sight of Sophie and Lucas playing in the backyard. What I saw instead made my stomach clench with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. There was a dumpster in the driveway overflowing with furniture and belongings. I could see Michael's desk, the one where he'd help the children with homework every evening. His bookshelf still loaded with the educational materials we'd discussed over coffee, the comfortable recliner where he'd fallen asleep reading bedtime stories to the children on Sunday afternoons. And standing beside the dumpster, directing 2 men who were carrying out more furniture, was Victoria. She was wearing expensive workout clothes that probably cost more than I'd spent on groceries in the past month. Her phone pressed to her ear, laughing at something the person on the other end was saying. I watched as they brought out the small writing table from Michael's office, the one where he'd set up his laptop during his final months when the stairs became too difficult, the table where he'd spent hours organizing family photos, writing letters to the children for future birthdays he knew he wouldn't see. Victoria waved dismissively as they tossed it into the dumpster with a crash that I could hear from half a block away. I drove away before she could see me, my hands shaking so violently I had to pull over in an empty parking lot and sit until the worst of the trembling stopped. How could she just discard everything that connected the children to their father? How could she erase him so completely and so quickly? That evening, I made the mistake of checking Facebook on the library's public computer during my daily internet session. Victoria had posted a photo of herself in what looked like a completely redesigned living room. Everything was white and chrome and minimalist. Nothing like the warm, comfortable family space where Michael used to build blanket forts with the children. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to clear out the old to make room for the new. Feeling grateful for fresh starts and new beginnings." The comments were exactly what I expected. Friends praising her strength, her courage, her ability to focus on the future. Someone had even written, "Michael would be so proud of how well you're handling everything." I closed the browser without reading anymore. That night, huddled in my car behind the supermarket, I allowed myself to cry for the first time since I'd left. Not the silent tears I'd been shedding for weeks, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere so buried I'd forgotten it existed. I cried for Michael, for the grandchildren I might never see again, for the life I'd lost, for the woman I used to be. But mostly I cried because I was starting to believe what Victoria's actions had told me all along, that I was disposable. That 5 years of love and service and sacrifice meant nothing, that I was just an inconvenience to be discarded when I was no longer useful. The crying exhausted me and I fell asleep slumped against the car door, my cheek pressed against the cold window. I dreamed about Michael as a little boy, tugging on my teaching apron and asking for help reaching something on a high shelf. In the dream, I was young again, strong again, needed again. I woke up to the sound of my phone ringing, a number I didn't recognize displaying on the cracked screen. For a moment, I considered not answering. In my experience lately, unknown numbers meant bills I couldn't pay or people I couldn't help. But something made me slide my finger across the screen. "Mrs. Peterson, this is Thomas Anderson from Anderson and Associates. I was your son Michael's attorney. I've been trying to reach you for several days. We need to discuss some urgent matters regarding Michael's estate." My heart started racing. In my experience, lawyers calling meant problems. Medical bills, insurance issues, things I couldn't afford to deal with. I cleared my throat, trying to sound more composed than I felt sitting in my car behind a supermarket at 700 in the morning. Yes, this is Beverly Peterson. I've been trying to reach you for several days. We need to discuss some urgent matters regarding Michael's estate. Could you come to my office today? It's quite important. Estate. Michael had always been careful with money, but I assumed whatever he had would go to Victoria and the children. I'm not sure I understand. Victoria handles all of Michael's affairs now. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mrs. Peterson, there are specific provisions in your son's will that concern you directly. Provisions that Mrs. Peterson Victoria is not aware of. I really need to speak with you in person. Something in his tone made my pulse quicken. Can you tell me what this is about? Not over the phone. Can you be here at 1000 a.m.? I'm located downtown, the Morrison Building on 5th Street. I looked down at my wrinkled clothes, ran a hand through my unwashed hair. Mr. Anderson, I should probably mention that I'm going through a difficult time right now. I might not look very presentable. Mrs. Peterson, his voice was gentle but firm. Please come as you are. This cannot wait any longer. 3 hours later, I sat in the most luxurious office I'd ever been in, feeling completely out of place. Thomas Anderson was a distinguished man in his 50s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd offered me coffee, which I'd accepted gratefully. It was the first decent cup I'd had in weeks. Mrs. Peterson, before we begin, I need to ask you something. And please answer honestly. What is your current living situation? The question caught me off guard, and I felt heat rise to my cheeks. I'm between homes at the moment. His expression grew concerned. Michael mentioned that there might be issues with Victoria after his passing. Are you staying with friends, family? The kindness in his voice almost undid me. I looked down at my hands wrapped around the warm coffee mug. I'm staying in my car. I see. He made a note on his legal pad, and I expected judgment, but his face showed only compassion. Michael was a very perceptive man. He anticipated this might happen. He pulled out a thick manila folder and opened it carefully. Mrs. Peterson, I need to read you several sections of your son's will. But first, let me ask, what do you know about Michael's financial situation? Not much. I know he had life insurance through his work and the house, but I assumed it all went to Victoria and the children. Mr. Anderson nodded slowly. Michael came to see me about 8 months ago, shortly after his cancer diagnosis. He was very specific about certain changes he wanted to make to his will. Changes that he asked me to keep completely confidential until after his death. He pulled out a document and adjusted his glasses. Let me read you the relevant section. To my beloved mother, Beverly Peterson, who sacrificed so much for my happiness and well-being throughout my life, and who dedicated her career to educating children, including myself, I leave the sum of $7 million to be held in trust and managed by Anderson and Associates until such time as Mrs. Peterson can establish stable housing and financial management. The words seemed to hang in the air. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. I'm sorry. Could you repeat that? 7 million, Mrs. Peterson. Your son was far wealthier than most people knew. His technology company's stock options and intellectual property rights were extremely valuable, and his life insurance policy was substantial. I felt dizzy. But Victoria said, she said everything belonged to her now. Mrs. Peterson, may I ask what exactly Victoria told you? The words tumbled out. The expulsion from the house, the casual cruelty, the complete dismissal of my 5 years of service to the family. As I spoke, Mr. Anderson's expression grew increasingly grim. Michael specifically anticipated this scenario, he said when I finished. There's more to the will that you need to hear. He flipped to another page. In the event that my wife Victoria Peterson attempts to remove my mother from the family home, or otherwise cut off contact between my mother and my children, full custody of Sophie Peterson and Lucas Peterson shall immediately transfer to my mother, Beverly Peterson, with all necessary financial support included. My coffee mug slipped from my numb fingers, and Mr. Anderson quickly moved to catch it before it hit his expensive carpet. Custody, but how is that possible? Michael filed all the necessary paperwork months ago. He documented several concerning behaviors he'd observed in Victoria. Her increasing focus on his life insurance payouts, her comments about starting fresh after his death, her apparent lack of emotional connection to the children's grief process. He pulled out another folder, this one thicker. Michael also set up recordings of several conversations with Victoria during his final weeks. Conversations where she discussed her plans for after his death, including her intention to send you away and possibly relocate the children to be closer to her sister in California. He recorded her? With legal counsel's guidance, yes. Michael was very concerned about his children's welfare. He'd noticed that Victoria seemed to view them more as reflections of her lifestyle than as individuals with their own emotional needs. Mr. Anderson opened another document. There's also a letter he wrote to you to be delivered with this information. Would you like me to read it, or would you prefer to read it privately? My hands were shaking so badly I didn't trust myself to hold paper. Could you read it, please? He unfolded a sheet of paper covered in Michael's familiar handwriting. Mom, if you're hearing this, it means my worst fears about Victoria have come true. I'm so sorry I couldn't warn you while I was alive. But I was afraid she'd turn the children against you if she knew what I suspected about her true feelings toward our family. I've been watching her for months, and I've seen how she looks at you when she thinks no one is paying attention. I've heard her on the phone with her sister talking about how much easier her life will be when she doesn't have to deal with Michael's interfering mother anymore. I know she probably told you that you're not wanted, that you're a burden. She's wrong. You are the most loving, dedicated person I've ever known. You gave up your comfortable retirement to help us, and I will never forget that. The money I'm leaving you isn't just an inheritance. It's payment for all the years you put our needs before your own, just like you did for all those students throughout your teaching career. It's also my way of making sure you have the power to protect Sophie and Lucas, the way you always protected me. I know Victoria will fight this, but I've made sure she can't win. You are their grandmother, and you love them in a way she never has and never will. They need you, Mom. I need you to take care of them. Don't let guilt or doubt stop you from claiming what's rightfully yours. You earned every penny, and those children need at least one parent who puts their emotional well-being first. I love you, and I'm sorry I waited so long to make sure you were protected. Your grateful son, Michael. By the time Mr. Anderson finished reading, tears were streaming down my face. Not tears of grief this time, but something else entirely. Relief, vindication, and underneath it all, a growing sense of power I hadn't felt in weeks. When can we proceed with the custody transfer? I asked, my voice steadier than it had been in days. Mr. Anderson smiled. We can file the paperwork this afternoon, but first let's get you out of that car and into a hotel while we arrange for more permanent housing. Michael set aside funds specifically for your immediate needs. As we discussed logistics, I felt something shifting inside me. For 2 weeks, I'd been a victim of circumstances of Victoria's cruelty, of my own helplessness. But sitting in that office learning about the elaborate safety net my son had constructed around me and his children, I realized I wasn't a victim anymore. I was about to become the most important person in Sophie and Lucas's lives. With the financial means to give them everything they needed, and the legal authority to protect them from their mother's emotional neglect, Michael had given me more than money. He'd given me purpose, power, and the chance to honor his memory by loving his children the way he'd always loved me. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. 3 days later, I stood in front of the house that had been my home for 5 years. But this time, everything was different. This time, I held legal documents that changed everything. Mr. Anderson had insisted on accompanying me along with a social worker from the county and a police officer. Standard procedure for custody transfers, he'd explained. I'd spent the previous 2 nights in a comfortable hotel suite, eating room service and taking long hot showers, while Mr. Anderson's office arranged for emergency housing assistance and processed the legal paperwork. I was wearing new clothes, nothing fancy but clean and properly fitted. I'd gotten my hair styled and felt more like myself than I had in weeks. But the biggest change wasn't visible. It was the way I carried myself, the quiet confidence that came from knowing I wasn't powerless anymore. Remember, Mr. Anderson said quietly as we walked up the front path, let me do most of the talking initially. This will be a shock to Mrs. Peterson, and she may react emotionally. The police officer, a kind-faced woman named Officer Martinez, nodded toward the house. I can see movement inside. Looks like someone's home. I pressed the doorbell, the same doorbell I'd heard thousands of times, but never as a visitor with legal authority. Through the frosted glass, I could see Victoria's figure approaching. She was probably expecting a delivery, or maybe one of her clients stopping by to admire her redecorating project. The door swung open and Victoria's expression went through several rapid changes. Confusion, recognition, annoyance, and finally something approaching panic as she noticed the official entourage behind me. "Beverly, what is this? What are you doing here?" Mr. Anderson stepped forward smoothly. "Mrs. Peterson, I'm Thomas Anderson, Michael's attorney. We need to discuss some important legal matters concerning your children. May we come in?" "I don't understand." "Beverly, why are there police here? Are you in some kind of trouble?" The irony wasn't lost on me. Even now, even seeing me with lawyers and official documentation, Victoria's first assumption was that I was the problem, that I was the one who had done something wrong. "Mrs. Peterson," Officer Martinez said gently, "we're here to execute a legal custody transfer. May we step inside so we can discuss this privately?" Victoria's face went pale, but she stepped back to let us in. The living room looked exactly as it had in her Facebook photos. Sterile, expensive, and completely devoid of anything that suggested children lived here. Gone were Michael's warm touches, the family photos, the comfortable furniture where the kids used to do homework and watch movies. "Where are Sophie and Lucas?" the social worker asked, consulting her clipboard. "They're at school," Victoria said automatically, then seemed to realize the implications of the question. "Wait, what did you mean by custody transfer? What is this about?" Mr. Anderson opened his briefcase and pulled out the documents we'd discussed. "Mrs. Peterson, I need to inform you of certain provisions in your late husband's will that are now taking effect." As he read the relevant sections aloud, I watched Victoria's face transform. The polished mask she always wore began to crack, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. "That's impossible," she interrupted, her voice rising. "Michael never said anything about this." "You're lying." "I have all the original documents here, Mrs. Peterson, including audio recordings of conversations between you and Michael where these concerns were discussed." "Recordings?" Her voice was a whisper now. Mr. Anderson pulled out a small digital device. "Michael documented several conversations where you discussed your plans for after his death, including your intention to remove Mrs. Beverly Peterson from the children's lives and potentially relocate to California." He pressed play and Michael's voice filled the room. Even after weeks, hearing him speak made my chest tighten with grief. "Victoria, I need to know what your plans are for Mom after I'm gone." Victoria's recorded voice was cold, matter-of-fact. "Michael, we've talked about this. Your mother is lovely, but she's not my responsibility. The children and I need space to heal and move forward." "Move forward to where?" "I've been thinking California might be nice. Fresh start, closer to my sister. The children would love the beaches. And Mom, your mother is a grown woman, Michael. She'll figure something out." The recording continued, but I stopped listening to the words. Instead, I watched Victoria's face as she heard her own voice dismissing me so casually, discussing my future like I was a piece of furniture she needed to dispose of. When the recording stopped, the silence in the room was deafening. "How dare you?" Victoria whispered. And for a moment I thought she was talking to Mr. Anderson. Then she turned to me, her eyes blazing with fury. "How dare you come into my home with these people and try to take my children?" "They're not just your children," I said quietly, speaking for the first time since we'd entered. "They're Michael's children too. And according to his will, they're now my responsibility. You can't do this. I'll fight it. I'll prove you're unfit. You're homeless. You have no job, no money." Mr. Anderson cleared his throat. "Mrs. Peterson, I should inform you that Mrs. Beverly Peterson is now the beneficiary of a $7 million inheritance from Michael's estate. Her housing and financial situation have been completely resolved." The number hit Victoria like a physical blow. She actually stumbled backward, catching herself against the white leather sofa that had replaced Michael's comfortable old sectional. $7 million, her voice was barely audible. "But the life insurance was only $2 million. I already received that. Michael had significant technology investments and intellectual property assets beyond the life insurance policy," Mr. Anderson explained patiently. "Assets that he chose to leave to his mother along with custody of his children." I watched Victoria's mind racing, trying to process this information. I could see the exact moment when the reality hit her. Not only had she lost the children, she'd lost access to the money she'd probably been counting on. "This isn't fair," she said, and for the first time her voice broke. "I'm their mother. I've taken care of them for years." "Have you?" The question came out of me before I could stop it. "When was the last time you helped Sophie with her nightmares about losing her daddy? When did you last sit with Lucas while he cried because he missed his father's bedtime stories?" Victoria's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. When did you last cook them a nutritious meal instead of ordering takeout? When did you last ask them how they're feeling instead of telling them to move on because their grief was inconvenient for your schedule? That's not. I was grieving too. No, I said, my voice growing stronger. You were redecorating. You were planning your fresh start. You were throwing away their father's belongings and telling them not to be dramatic when they asked questions. The social worker looked up from her notes. Mrs. Peterson, the children will need to be picked up from school today. Do you have arrangements for their belongings? Victoria looked around the sterile living room as if seeing it for the first time. Their things. Their clothes are upstairs, their toys. Most of their toys are in storage or were donated, Officer Martinez observed, consulting a report on her phone. According to the documentation we received, several boxes of children's belongings were removed from the house last week. I felt my anger building again. You got rid of their toys? Their father's things and their toys? I was trying to help them heal. Victoria's voice was desperate now. All those old things just reminded them of what they'd lost. Those old things were their connections to their father, I said. Those were the memories they'll need when they're older, when they want to remember how much he loved them. The social worker closed her notebook. Mrs. Peterson, we'll need to collect the children at 3:15 when school dismisses. Mrs. Beverly Peterson has temporary housing arranged, and permanent housing will be established within the week. As the official group began to file out to prepare for the school pickup, Victoria grabbed my arm. Beverly, please. You don't understand what you're doing. Those kids need stability, routine. I can provide that. I looked down at her hand on my arm, remembering all the times I'd reached out to her over the years, offering help, comfort, support, only to be politely but firmly pushed away. Victoria, I said gently, removing her hand from my arm, you had your chance to provide stability. Instead, you provided interior design consultations and a networking schedule. I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. The children will be allowed to see you, of course. Michael wanted them to have a relationship with their mother, but it will be supervised visits, and it will be on my terms. This isn't over, she called after me, but her voice lacked conviction. As we drove toward the elementary school, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and anticipation. Sadness for the family that Michael had tried so hard to hold together. Anticipation for the chance to give Sophie and Lucas what they really needed. Not a perfect house or expensive clothes, but someone who would listen to their fears, honor their father's memory, and love them unconditionally. The way Michael had always loved me. The first thing Sophie said when she saw me waiting outside her classroom wasn't, "Grandma Beverly," or, "What are you doing here?" It was a whisper that broke my heart. "Are you real or am I dreaming again?" I knelt down to her level, ignoring the curious stares from other parents and teachers. "I'm real, sweetheart, and I'm here to take you and Lucas home. But Mummy said you went away because you didn't want to live with us anymore." Her voice was so small, so careful, like she was afraid the wrong words might make me disappear again. I felt the social worker's gentle hand on my shoulder, a reminder that I needed to be careful how I responded, that everything I said would be part of the official record. But looking into Sophie's confused 7-year-old eyes, I couldn't bring myself to care about documentation. "Your mommy was wrong, Sophie. I never wanted to leave you. I love you and Lucas more than anything in the world." Lucas appeared from his classroom down the hall, his 9-year-old swagger faltering the moment he spotted me. For a second, his face lit up with pure joy. Then he seemed to remember something, and his expression closed off. "Mom said you were mad at us," he said when he reached us, his voice trying to sound casual but failing. "She said that's why you left without saying goodbye." I looked between these two beautiful children, seeing the careful walls they'd built around their feelings, the way they'd learned to protect themselves from disappointment. In just 2 weeks, they'd already started adapting to a world where people they loved could vanish without warning. "Lucas, Sophie, I need you both to listen to me very carefully," I said, sitting down on the hallway floor so we were all at the same level. "I didn't leave because I was mad at you or because I didn't want to live with you. I left because your mother asked me to leave and I thought I had to do what she said." "But you're our grandma," Sophie said, tears starting to form in her eyes. "Grandmas aren't supposed to leave." "You're absolutely right. Grandmas aren't supposed to leave, and I'm never leaving you again." The social worker cleared her throat gently. "Children, your grandmother is going to be taking care of you from now on. She has a nice place for you to stay, and all the legal paperwork has been completed." Lucas's eyes widened. You mean we don't have to live with Mom anymore? The question hung in the air, and I realized that these children had been just as unhappy with their post-Michael life as I'd suspected. They'd been grieving not just their father, but the warmth and comfort that had disappeared from their home along with him. You'll still see your mother, I explained carefully, but you'll live with me. We'll have our own place with room for all your things and all your memories of Daddy. Can I have pictures of Daddy in my room? Sophie asked immediately. Mommy put them all away because she said they made her too sad. You can have as many pictures as you want. We'll make a whole wall of Daddy pictures if that's what makes you happy. Lucas looked skeptical. Mom said you don't have any money and that's why you had to leave. How can you take care of us if you don't have money? I smiled, thinking about the conversation I'd had with Mr. Anderson about how to explain the inheritance to children. Your daddy made sure I'd have everything I need to take care of you. He was very smart about money and he loved us all very much. Daddy left you money? Sophie's eyes were wide. He left me something much more important than money, Sophie. He left me the job of taking care of his most precious treasures. You and Lucas. The drive to our temporary housing, a furnished 3-bedroom apartment that Mr. Anderson's office had arranged, was quiet. Both children sat in the back seat, occasionally whispering to each other, processing this massive change in their lives. When we arrived, I watched their faces as they took in the modest but comfortable space. It wasn't the showcase home they'd been living in with Victoria, but it felt warm in a way that house hadn't for months. This is your room, Sophie, I said, showing her the smaller bedroom. I've already started decorating with some of your favorite things. I'd managed to salvage a few stuffed animals, some books, the nightlight that looked like a butterfly. And Lucas, this one is yours. Lucas stood in the doorway of his room, looking around at the twin bed. The desk where he could do homework, the bookshelf waiting to be filled. It's smaller than my room at Mom's house, he observed. That's true. Is that okay? He was quiet for a long moment. It feels warmer, he said finally. Like someone who loves me picked it out. That first evening, we ordered pizza and sat on the living room floor eating it straight from the box, something Victoria never would have allowed in her perfectly maintained house. I told them stories about their father as a little boy, stories they'd never heard before, and watched them laugh for the first time in weeks. Daddy really put peanut butter in his hair, Sophie giggled. He was convinced it would make his hair grow faster so he could look like his favorite baseball player. Your grandfather was not amused when he came home from work and found Michael's hair full of Skippy. What did Grandpa do? Lucas asked, completely absorbed in the story. He sat your daddy down in the kitchen and spent 2 hours washing his hair with dish soap. And then he told him that if he wanted to be like his baseball hero, he should practice hitting and catching instead of experimenting with condiments. As the evening wore on, I noticed small things that broke my heart. Sophie automatically started cleaning up the pizza boxes and napkins without being asked, something she'd clearly been trained to do to keep Victoria's house spotless. Lucas kept glancing at the clock and asking if it was time for bed, as if he was worried about breaking some rule. Sophie, sweetheart, you don't have to clean up. We can do it together in a little while. But Mom says if we don't clean up right away, we make extra work for other people. Your mom was right that it's good to be helpful, I said carefully. But in our house, we don't have to worry about making everything perfect all the time. Sometimes it's okay to just relax and enjoy being together. That night, after both children were settled in their beds, I sat in the living room and called Mr. Anderson to update him on the transition. How are they adjusting? He asked. Better than I expected. But there are signs that they've been walking on eggshells for months. They're afraid to make messes, afraid to be too loud, afraid to show too much emotion. That's consistent with what Michael documented in his notes about Victoria's parenting style. The good news is that children are resilient. With consistent love and patience, they'll remember how to be children again. Over the next few weeks, I watched Sophie and Lucas slowly come back to life. Sophie started having tea parties with her stuffed animals again, instead of keeping them lined up perfectly on her shelf. Lucas began leaving his baseball glove on the kitchen counter and his homework spread across the dining table, instead of immediately putting everything away. They started asking questions about their father. Not just the sanitized memories Victoria had allowed, but real questions about his childhood. His fears, his dreams, his sense of humor. I showed them videos on my phone of Michael teaching them to ride bikes, of family barbecues, of quiet Sunday mornings when he'd make pancakes in funny shapes. Daddy was really scared of spiders? Lucas asked one evening as we looked through old photo albums. Terrified. When he was about your age, He called me screaming from the bathroom because there was a spider on the wall. I had to come upstairs and capture it with a cup and a piece of paper. But Dad wasn't scared of anything, Sophie protested. Oh, sweetheart, everyone is scared of something. Your daddy was scared of spiders and thunderstorms. And the first time he had to give a presentation at work. But being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what you need to do even when you are scared. These conversations were healing for all of us. The children were reclaiming their father as a real person rather than the perfect memory Victoria had tried to preserve. And I was remembering Michael not just as the son I'd lost, but as the man who'd loved his children enough to protect them even after his death. But the real breakthrough came on a rainy Saturday afternoon when Sophie found me crying quietly in the kitchen while I made lunch. Grandma Beverly, are you sad because of Daddy? I wiped my eyes and knelt down to her level. Yes, sweetheart. I miss him very much. Do you ever feel sad about Daddy? She nodded solemnly. Mommy said I shouldn't cry about Daddy because it makes other people sad, too. Oh, Sophie. I pulled her into a hug. It's okay to cry when you miss someone you love. Crying doesn't make me sad. It makes me proud that you loved your daddy so much. Can I cry with you sometimes? Always, sweetheart. We can cry together and we can laugh together and we can remember Daddy together. That afternoon, all three of us ended up on the couch, sharing memories and tears and tissues. For the first time since Michael's death, his children were allowed to grieve properly, to feel their emotions without worrying about how it affected the adults around them. As Lucas fell asleep against my shoulder, and Sophie curled up with her head in my lap, I realized that Michael had given me more than money and legal authority. He'd given me the chance to give his children what they needed most. Permission to be human, to feel deeply, to love without fear. And in doing so, he'd saved not just them, but me as well. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of our new home, a modest 3-bedroom house with a backyard where Sophie could practice cartwheels and Lucas could throw his baseball against the fence. The sounds of children being children filled every corner. No tiptoeing around expensive furniture, no whispered conversations, no constant worry about disturbing someone's peace. Sophie was upstairs playing music while she organized her rock collection, something that would have sent Victoria into a panic about noise levels and mess. Lucas was in the living room, sprawled on the floor with his homework spread across the coffee table, occasionally calling out math questions for me to help him solve. These were the sounds Michael had wanted to protect when he made his secret arrangements. This was the life he'd envisioned for his children. Messy, loud, real, and full of unconditional love. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the front window, I could see a familiar figure standing on the porch, and my stomach tightened with old anxiety before I reminded myself that things were different now. Victoria stood on my doorstep holding a small gift bag, looking more uncertain than I'd ever seen her. The past 6 months hadn't been kind to her. Word around town was that she'd had to sell the showcase house. Apparently, Michael's technology investments and insurance money had been specifically structured so that most of it went to his children's trust fund. And to me, leaving her with only enough to start over, not enough to maintain her expensive lifestyle. Hello, Beverly, she said when I opened the door. I was hoping I could see the children for a few minutes. It's not your scheduled visitation day, I said calmly. Over the months, we'd established a routine. Supervised visits every other Saturday afternoon with the understanding that any changes needed to be discussed in advance. I know. I brought Sophie something for her birthday next week, and I thought maybe we could talk. I studied her face, looking for signs of the manipulation that had once come so naturally to her. Instead, I saw something I'd never seen before. Genuine humility. The children are doing homework, I said. But you can come in for a few minutes. She followed me into the living room where Lucas looked up from his math problems with a polite but guarded expression. Hi, Mom. Hi, sweetheart. How's school going? Good. I made the honor roll again. His voice was matter of fact, neither seeking her approval nor rejecting her interest. That's wonderful, Lucas. Your father would be so proud. Something in her tone was different. Softer, less performative. Lucas seemed to notice it too because his posture relaxed slightly. Sophie, I called upstairs. Your mother is here. Sophie appeared at the top of the stairs and I watched Victoria's face change as she took in her daughter's appearance. Sophie's hair was in a messy ponytail. She was wearing comfortable clothes that had definitely seen better days. And there was a streak of something that might have been paint or marker on her cheek. She looked exactly like what she was, a 8-year-old girl who'd been allowed to be a child. "Hi, Mommy," Sophie said, coming down the stairs, but stopping a few steps from the bottom. "I brought you an early birthday present," Victoria said, holding out the gift bag. Sophie looked at me for permission before accepting it. Another sign of how much their relationship had changed. Inside the bag was a small silver locket. Not expensive or flashy, just simple and pretty. "It has a picture of Daddy in it," Victoria said quietly. "I thought you might like to wear it sometimes." Sophie opened the locket and smiled when she saw Michael's photo inside. "Thank you, Mummy. It's really pretty. Would you like me to help you put it on?" Sophie nodded. And for a few minutes, they worked together to fasten the chain around her neck. It was the most natural interaction I'd seen between them since before Michael's death. After Sophie went back upstairs and Lucas returned to his homework, Victoria and I stood in the kitchen, the space thick with unspoken words. "They look happy," she said finally. "They are happy. They're allowed to be sad sometimes too, which is equally important." She nodded slowly. "I wanted to apologize, Beverly, for how I treated you after Michael died. For the things I said." I leaned against the counter, studying her face. "What changed?" "Losing them," she said simply. "Losing the children made me realize that I'd been losing them already, bit, by trying to control everything instead of just loving them. And seeing how much they've thrived with you made me understand that Michael was right. He knew what they needed, and he knew I wasn't ready to give it to them." It was the closest thing to accountability I'd ever heard from Victoria, and I found myself softening slightly despite myself. "They still need their mother," I said carefully. "Just not the mother you were trying to be. They need you to be real with them, to let them see your emotions, to admit when you make mistakes. I don't know how to do that. I was raised to keep everything together, to never let anyone see you struggle. Michael struggled too, especially at the end. But he let the children see that it was okay to be scared, okay to be sad, okay to need help. That's what made him such a good father." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, then said something that surprised me. "You're a good grandmother, Beverly. Better than I ever gave you credit for. I love them. That's all I've ever done." "No, it's more than that. You listen to them. You see who they really are instead of trying to make them into who you think they should be." As she prepared to leave, Victoria paused at the front door. "Beverly, would it be possible to schedule an extra visit next week for Sophie's birthday? I'd like to take both children out for ice cream, just the three of us." I considered the request. 6 months ago, I would have been terrified to let the children go anywhere alone with Victoria. But the woman standing in front of me wasn't the same person who'd thrown away Michael's belongings and dismissed my grief. She wasn't completely transformed. That would take years if it happened at all, but she was trying. 1 hour, I said. "And they call me when you pick them up and when you drop them off." "Thank you." After she left, Lucas looked up from his homework. "Grandma Beverly, do you think Mum is getting better?" It was such a perceptive question from a 9-year-old, and I realized that these children had been watching their mother just as carefully as I had. "I think she's trying to get better," I said honestly. "What do you think?" "She seemed sadder but nicer," he said thoughtfully. "Like maybe she misses Dad the way we do now." That evening, after both children were in bed, I sat on the back porch with a cup of tea and thought about the strange journey that had brought us to this point. 6 months ago, I'd been sleeping in my car, convinced that I was unwanted and unnecessary. Tonight, I was the legal guardian of 2 thriving children, living in a comfortable home with enough financial security to never worry about basic needs again. But the money wasn't the real gift Michael had given me. The real gift was purpose. For the first time in years, I woke up every morning knowing exactly why I was needed. Not as a convenient babysitter or household helper, but as the person who loved these children unconditionally and would always put their emotional needs first. The next morning, Sophie found me in the kitchen making pancakes. Michael's recipe with too much vanilla and a pinch of cinnamon that he'd never measured, but somehow always got exactly right. "Grandma Beverly," she said, climbing onto her usual stool at the breakfast counter. "I had a dream about Daddy last night. Was it a good dream or a sad dream?" "Good. He was making pancakes just like you are, and he told me he was happy that you're taking care of us." I felt tears prick my eyes, but I didn't try to hide them. Sophie had learned that it was okay for adults to cry. That tears didn't mean something was wrong. "I'm happy to take care of you too, sweetheart. It's the best job I've ever had." Lucas stumbled into the kitchen still in his pajamas, hair sticking up in every direction. "Are those Dad's pancakes?" "They are, with extra vanilla, just like he used to make them." As we sat around the breakfast table, syrup dripping onto plates and orange juice spilled on the placemat, I realized that this was what Michael had been fighting for in those final months. Not just his children's financial security, but their right to live in a home where love was more important than perfection, where grief was allowed to coexist with joy, where being human was not just tolerated, but celebrated. Outside, I could hear neighbors starting their weekend routines. Lawnmowers humming, children playing in backyards. The normal sounds of families living their lives. We were part of that now, Sophie and Lucas and I. We belonged somewhere again. Later that day, as I tucked Sophie into bed, she looked up at me with those serious brown eyes that reminded me so much of Michael at that age. "Grandma Beverly, are you ever going to leave us again?" "Never," I said, smoothing the hair back from her forehead. "I'm going to be right here until you're grown up and don't need me anymore." "And then what will you do?" I smiled, thinking about all the possibilities that stretched ahead of us. "Then I'll be the grandmother who spoils your children and tells them embarrassing stories about how their parents used to eat dirt and put peanut butter in their hair." Sophie giggled. "Lucas ate dirt? Constantly. Your father too." "I think it might be genetic." As I turned off her bedlight and headed toward my own room, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me was different from the one who'd packed her belongings in shame 6 months ago. She was stronger, more confident, but also softer somehow. She knew her worth now. Michael had saved us all, his children from a life of emotional neglect, and me from the despair of believing I was disposable. His final gift wasn't just money or legal documents. It was the reminder that love doesn't end with death, that protecting the people we care about sometimes requires difficult choices, and that sometimes the greatest act of faith is trusting someone else to carry on what we started. In my bedroom, I opened the drawer where I kept Michael's last letter to me, the one Mr. Anderson had given me along with all the legal papers. I'd read it dozens of times, but tonight I needed to see his words again. "You are not a burden, Mom. You never were. You are the heart of this family, and I need you to remember that when things get difficult. Take care of my children the way you took care of me, with patience, with humor, with unconditional love. They will need you to be strong, but they will also need you to be human. Thank you for everything you sacrificed for me. Now it's my turn to take care of you." I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the drawer. Tomorrow was Sunday, which meant pancakes and errands and maybe a trip to the park if the weather was nice. Simple, ordinary family life, the kind Michael had always treasured, the kind he'd made sure his children would continue to have. For the first time in months, I fell asleep without a single worry about the future. We were exactly where we belonged.